He faked his death to expose his children's true colors, and what he was shocked him. The day Marcus Okonkwo supposedly died, his eldest son was already calculating the value of the estate. His daughter was rehearsing her funeral tears in front of a mirror. And his youngest son was booking a flight home, not out of grief, but out of fear that he might miss his share of the fortune. But Marcus Okonkwo wasn't dead. Not even close. The 72-year-old business tycoon lay perfectly still in his mahogany study, watching through barely opened eyelids as his personal physician delivered the fabricated news to his family. The doctor, bound by a private agreement and a substantial payment, played his role with convincing sorrow. The family's reactions, however, would prove far more theatrical than any performance the old man could have imagined. What Marcus witnessed in the hours, days, and weeks following his staged death would shatter every illusion he had carefully constructed about his children over the decades. The inheritance he had built through sweat, sacrifice, and sleepless nights was about to become a battlefield, and the casualties would be measured not in money, but in the complete destruction of familial bonds. Marcus had not arrived at this desperate plan overnight. For months, he had noticed the subtle shifts in his children's behavior. The phone calls that came only when they needed money. The visits that felt more like business meetings than family gatherings. The way their eyes would glaze over when he spoke about anything other than his will. He had built an empire worth over $200 million, starting from nothing but a small transport business with 2 aging vehicles. He had survived military coups, economic recessions, and cutthroat competitors. But he had never felt more alone than in the vast mansion surrounded by children who seemed to view him as nothing more than a walking inheritance. The idea came to him during one particularly hollow family dinner. His 3 children sat around the imported Italian dining table, their phones buzzing with messages, their minds clearly elsewhere. They had come because he had summoned them, promising an important announcement about his estate planning. The announcement never came. Instead, Marcus studied them throughout the meal, seeing them perhaps for the first time without the rose-tinted glasses of parental love. What he saw disturbed him deeply enough to conceive of the most elaborate test any father could devise. His eldest son, Chidi, was 43 years old and had been groomed since birth to take over the family business. Marcus had sent him to the finest schools in England, paid for his MBA at Harvard, and handed him an executive position in the company before he turned 30. Chidi wore expensive suits, drove a Mercedes-Benz that cost more than most houses, and spoke with the polished accent of someone who had spent too much time trying to forget where he came from. He had married a woman from a prominent political family, more for connections than love, and they had produced 2 children who called their grandfather Sir instead of something warmer. Chidi's ambition was naked and unapologetic. He had been waiting for his father to die for years, though he would never admit it out loud. The daughter, Adana, was 38 and had always been Marcus's favorite, though he would deny it if asked. She had her mother's face, and perhaps that was why he had indulged her more than the others. Adana had studied law but never practiced, instead becoming what she called a social entrepreneur, which seemed to involve attending charity galas and posting pictures on social media. She had been married twice, both times to men who were more interested in her family's wealth than in her. Marcus had paid for both weddings and both divorces, never once hearing a genuine thank you. Adana lived in a luxury apartment in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, drove a Range Rover, and maintained a lifestyle that required a monthly allowance that could feed a small village for a year. The youngest, Obinna, was 32 and had always been the rebel. He had dropped out of university, much to Marcus's fury, and had spent his 20s traveling the world on his father's money, claiming to be finding himself. What he had found, apparently, was a series of failed business ventures, expensive addictions, and a talent for asking for money. Obinna was charming when he wanted something, cold when he didn't get it. He had never held a job for more than 6 months, never paid his own rent, and never once acknowledged the privilege that cushioned his every failure. These were Marcus's children. These were the people who would inherit everything he had built. The thought kept him awake at night, until finally, he decided to do something about it. The plan required careful orchestration. Marcus contacted his oldest friend, a retired judge named Emeka, and confided his intentions. Emeka thought he was mad at first, but Marcus was persuasive. He arranged for a secret location, a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood where no one would think to look for him. He enlisted his physician, his lawyer, and his most trusted business manager, each sworn to absolute secrecy under threat of legal action. He drafted a new will, one that would only be revealed after his resurrection, and he prepared himself mentally for what he might discover. The staged death occurred on a Wednesday morning. Marcus had complained of chest pains the night before, a detail his children would later recall with what they would claim was concern. The doctor arrived at dawn, spent 30 minutes in Marcus's bedroom, and emerged with the grave news. Marcus Okonkwo had suffered a massive heart attack. He was gone. What followed was a masterclass in human selfishness. Chidi arrived first, having been called by the doctor. He spent exactly 4 minutes in the room with his father's body before leaving to make phone calls. The calls were not to family friends or relatives. They were to lawyers, accountants, and business associates. Within an hour, Chidi was in his father's study, searching through files, checking documents, making lists. He was looking for the will, for bank account information, for anything that would give him an advantage in what he already saw as an inevitable battle with his siblings. From his hidden position behind a two-way mirror installed in the study wall, Marcus watched his son's every move. The old man's heart, which had not actually failed, felt like it might actually break. There were no tears on Chidi's face. No moment of grief or reflection. Just cold, calculated efficiency as he photographed documents with his phone and sent them to his personal lawyer. Adana arrived 2 hours later, her entrance far more dramatic. She wailed loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, threw herself across her father's bed, and declared that she couldn't possibly go on. The performance lasted approximately 15 minutes. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the tears stopped. She sat up, composed herself, and began asking about funeral arrangements. Specifically, she wanted to know who would be paying for them, and whether there was a budget. When the doctor mentioned that Marcus had left instructions for a simple ceremony, Adana's face twisted with disgust. Simple wouldn't do. People expected grandeur from the Okonkwo family. What would society say if they buried Marcus like some common man? She immediately began planning an elaborate funeral that would cost over 3 million naira, all to be charged to the estate. Obinna didn't arrive until the next day. His flight from Dubai, where he had been partying on his father's credit card, had been delayed. He showed up unshaven, hungover, and clearly inconvenienced. His condolences were perfunctory, delivered between yawns. But his interest sharpened considerably when Adana mentioned that she hadn't been able to find a copy of the will. Obinna suggested that perhaps their father had hidden it, or worse, had been planning to change it. This sparked the first real conversation the three siblings had engaged in together in years. It was not about their father's life, his achievements, or their memories of him. It was about money. Marcus listened from the adjacent room as his children speculated about their inheritance. Chidi insisted that as the eldest son and the one who worked in the business, he deserved the lion's share. Adana argued that their father had always favored her, and besides, as the only daughter, tradition demanded she receive a substantial portion. Obinna, perhaps more honest than his siblings, simply stated that he needed money more than either of them, therefore he should receive more. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising until they were shouting at each other in the same room where their father's body supposedly lay. The funeral was scheduled for 2 weeks later, following traditional customs. During those 2 weeks, Marcus observed his children from various hidden vantage points, aided by the small network of loyal servants who were in on the secret. What he witnessed systematically destroyed every positive feeling he had ever harbored toward them. Chidi used the time to consolidate power within the family business. He called emergency board meetings, positioned himself as the natural successor, and began making decisions as if he already owned the company. He fired 3 long-serving employees who had been loyal to Marcus, replacing them with his own people. He also began an affair with his father's young secretary, a woman Marcus had mentored and considered like a daughter. The betrayal was casual, opportunistic, and cruel. Adana transformed the funeral into a social circus. She hired the most expensive event planners in the city, demanded that the ceremony be held at the largest cathedral, and invited everyone who was anyone, regardless of whether they had known Marcus. She gave interviews to newspapers and magazines, positioning herself as the grieving daughter while wearing designer mourning clothes that cost more than most people earned in a year. She also began a whisper campaign against her brothers, suggesting to family members that neither Chidi nor Obinna had truly loved their father, that only she had been the devoted child. The lies came so easily to her that Marcus wondered if she even recognized them as lies anymore. Obinna's behavior was perhaps the most disturbing because